Hello, I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all around the world. And tonight, we'll talk with an author and an expert on the early church fathers about how friendship, just plain simple friendship, could become the most successful evangelization method of the early church, and how it remains central to expanding the kingdom of God today. Before we get to that, we want to talk briefly with EWTN's John Elson about a very special program coming later this week that I'm really interested in as well. John, what do you have for us this week?
Well, thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity to tell our audience about an exciting new original docudrama entitled St. Francis Xavier to the Ends of the Earth. As you mentioned, it'll be debuting December 3rd, his feast day, at 5 p.m. Eastern. And the program tells the story of the founding of the Jesuit order through the eyes of St. Francis Xavier. As you know, St. Francis was born in Spain in 1506. At 18, went to Paris to study at the Sorbonne. There he meets an older student named Inigo, who was from the same Spanish Basque region. And Inigo had a very different approach to life, and he invited the very ambitious Xavier to really discover the true meaning of life. Ignatius would tell Xavier, "What profit it is to a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul." And so the very
And by the way, do they have the pool game in there?
Yeah, no, not in this.
Because that's how he got him. He made him play pool.
Made him play pool.
And the loser had to serve the other for a month.
Yeah, right.
So he gave him a month-long retreat.
Yeah, that's great. And that's finally, through Ignatius's persistence, Xavier agreed to do the 30-day spiritual exercises. That then changes the very ambitious Xavier to becoming hungry for souls. And so with the other founding fathers of the Jesuit order, they found this new apostolic religious community, Society of Jesus. And Xavier, following the invitation of the King of Portugal, with the blessing of Pope Paul III, is one of two Jesuits that's sent to the West Indies, which is now Southeast Asia. And so he goes to India, learns about Japan, and our second program that will be debuting on Saturday, December 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern, digs deep into that experience of St. Francis Xavier in Japan and the incredible obstacles that he encountered throughout his entire time in Japan. One of the obstacles being that the population at the time didn't believe in an immortal soul. And so over some time, Xavier realized that the Japanese saw China as a model. And so he said, well, let me go to China. And if I can convert China, then it'll be easier to convert Japan, and dies en route. So I think Xavier in these two stories, we kind of tell bookends, if you will, of his life, early life, later life. And we're very excited to be able to share his zeal with our audience. His openness to God. When Ignatius asked him to accept the mission to Southeast Asia, he said, "Here I am." And I think our evangelization of our neighbors begins with that openness to seeking God's help, and also, as Xavier did, to see the good in the other. We may want to convert, friends and family to the faith, but as Xavier, we can begin with seeing what's good in the other, and to build on that. So we're very excited to bring this to our audience.
No, that's one of the reasons he's the co-patron of the missions, because of what he did. Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I hope you all get a chance to see that. St. Francis Xavier is great. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with tonight's guests, so please stay with us. Welcome back. We hear a lot about new evangelization. Pope St. John Paul talked about that, and that was very important. And our guest tonight is here to talk about some aspects of proclaiming this new evangelization today and ways it can benefit from the old evangelization employed by the early church fathers. They began very simply enough with friendship. And it was a very important aspect that the act of friendship led to remarkable growth in the early church. 40% growth per decade in the first 300 years of the life of the church, despite intermittent persecutions and the threat of death. Our author has also compiled the writings of the fathers of the early church and into the Middle Ages on the authentic love and influence of friendship in his newest book called Friendship and the Fathers, How the Early Church Evangelized. Please welcome Mike Aquilina. Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Good to have you. You know, of course, our audience is familiar with you, not only from being on this show in the past, but, you know, you and Scott Hahn have done series, how many, 11? 11.
Yes.
You know, series over the years. And you've, of course, been writing on a regular basis.
Yes.
This is an interesting approach because there is a lack of friendship being noted by the medical community and by psychologists, doctors, psychologists, and even some government officials see that there's a problem of people not being friends, not having
Yes.
many friends anymore. And this is a great way to approach the issue.
Well, thank you. I think it is timely. I think that this is something that's very much in need right now. As you point out, there have been longitudinal studies on friendship and social isolation done in the United States.
And by longitudinal, that means they take the same people and keep studying them over a number of years, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And so this study that was done from 1985 to 2005, well, when they began the study, they found that most people in the United States, most of the people in the study, reported having 3 close friends. 3 people in whom they could confide. They could open their hearts. They can talk about their thoughts or problems. By the end of the study, 25% of the people involved said that they didn't have any friends at all. So this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem.
Is.
And it was identified, and of course this is before COVID, and this is before social media and all of the damage that those 2 phenomena did to friendships. You mentioned that government officials are noticing this. In England, it was identified as a major public health problem. That there were physical ailments that could be traced back to the lack of friendship, lack of human contact. And there were many psychological problems as well. So they created a ministry.
There was even, when they create a ministry, that means a government office.
Yes, right.
It's not a group of volunteers at your parish.
No, it sounds absurd, but there
yeah.
was a ministry for loneliness.
Yeah,
For me,
that
though,
is odd.
For me, though, Father Mitch, this says that we Christians aren't doing our job. If there are 25% or more of the people out there who say they don't have a single friend on earth, well, then we Christians aren't doing our job. We're not reaching out to them. We're not reaching them.
Yeah. And I think it's been exacerbated during the last year and a half of the COVID shutdown, where in some states, your family was not allowed to see the elderly members in retirement homes and such. People were isolated
Yes.
from each other. Grandparents couldn't see their children or grandchildren, had to wave out windows. And so that just made it worse, you know, when there's already an existing problem, lack of friendship.
Yes, yes. Now, you know, that's the problem now. I think it's because it's suppressing a very human need, and that is this need for a relationship of mutual affection, interest, and trust. We need that. That's something we need, and when we don't have it, we miss it. We feel incomplete. I think that was epidemic at the time of the early church. because of certain patterns in the society at that time, Greco-Roman society. And I think that Christianity largely came along and appeared as a remedy to that, a remedy to loneliness.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it was a problem that showed up in increased divorce rates
Right.
and breakdown of family, so much so that Emperor Octavian, Caesar Augustus, had made laws against divorce because family was just breaking up and people were very lonely.
Right, right.
But the government can't really fix this.
Augustus failed.
Yep.
He failed. He made all these laws to make it burdensome to remain single. He put tax penalties on it, and he gave tax incentives to marrying and having children. And the more children you would have, the better your tax rate would be. And yet nobody did it. I mean, the law does not exactly make for a good relationship between husband and wife. So this continued to be a problem for more than 200 years.
Yep, yep. And it affected population size and a number of other issues. On the other hand, you bring out, how in the early church, they couldn't go on the street corners and start raising their voice and preaching out loud. They couldn't have tent meetings. They didn't have, of course, they didn't have the media we have.
Right.
So there were real limits
Right.
for public, expression of preaching the gospel.
That's right. Persecution was intermittent. But even in the times when it was relatively peaceful, you knew that those laws were on the books.
Yep.
They remained on the books.
Yep.
And Christians they never had a favored status in those early centuries. And when the persecutions started, as they did every 30 years or so maybe, you suffered if you were a Christian. You did not have access to what passed for media at that time. During those periods of persecution, if you owned a Christian book, it was a capital crime.
Yep.
And books could not be mass produced. So there were very few Christian books out there. There were no pamphlets. You couldn't stand in the forum and shout the gospel because you'd be dead before the next morning.
Yep.
It was a capital crime. So we didn't have access to the media the way we do today. The only medium we had for evangelization was friendship. That relationship that we could cultivate with our next door neighbors or the people in the market stall next to ours. We could get to know them. We can get into their lives, establish a bond of trust that was lacking in their lives. So we're actually giving them something long before we get to the gospel. We're giving them something that's natural and beautiful, and that's helping to make them whole and human.
Now, one of the interesting things you did is we like to know ancient history, and one of the people you cite as a really fine philosopher in so many ways, and yet lacking in this, was Cicero.
Yes.
Cicero, a great Roman statesman until the same Emperor Octavian executed him, but he was a very reflective man, thought about a lot of important issues, and reflected on friendship. But the Christians didn't follow his idea of friendship. Talk a bit about that.
Well, Cicero was very influential among the Christians. If you look at Ambrose, Augustine, Minucius Felix, all of these Latin writers in Christianity, they grew up on Cicero.
Yep.
Cicero was their great inspiration. Cicero played a major role in Augustine's conversion.
Well, even to the present, when I was in high school, Cicero's Latin was the norm.
Yeah.
You wanted to learn to write and think in Latin like Cicero. That's the norm.
Yes, and one of his masterpieces was the Laelius, which is usually translated as unfriendship. This is something that he thought deeply about, and he published this beautiful book on friendship. And a lot of the fathers engage it because they find a lot of wisdom in it, a lot of very practical advice. He was very much concerned about inequalities, and he did not think that unequal individuals could have a bond of friendship.
That in Roman Empire, someone who was a patrician or what they call the new man, someone who had worked his way up, if you were of the same status in society, you could be friends.
And Cicero went further than that. If you were the same status and you agreed on all political matters, religious matters, and other important social opinions, then you could be friends. You had to have this kind of prerequisite of perfect agreement in everything from the start.
Christians didn't buy into that.
No. Cicero is kind of like Facebook, right?
Yeah.
What he wanted is the power to create a world where everybody agrees with me, all right? Where everybody talks the way I do. People have the same political opinions I have. They don't challenge me, right?
Yeah.
And if anybody does challenge me, well, I can just block him or unfriend him. And I mean, Cicero would have loved Facebook. But,
And Twitter.
and Twitter and everything else, right?
But the thing that the Christians do is, and this is something important for all of us,
Yeah.
is that the Christians look to the words of Jesus
Yes.
Christ.
John
That-
15:15.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Right. I mean, the Christians took their lead from that statement at the Last Supper when Jesus said, "I have called you friends." Now, we hear that 2,000 years later as wah, 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 right? Because of course he calls us friends. Jesus is my buddy, right? But at that time, it was so radical. When Aristotle wrote about friendship, he talked about the absurdity of a God becoming friends with man. When he wanted to talk about inequalities and friendship, he used this as the extreme impossibility. He used it as an illustration of the problem with unequal persons trying to form a friendship. A God could not become friends with a man. And yet here's God himself taking flesh to dwell among us and be our friends, and then saying, "You're no longer servants. I have called you friends." This was such a revolution. And to be a Christian meant to imitate Christ, to share the life of Christ. And if you're doing that, you got to do what he did. You've got to make friends with other people and not be so exclusive as Cicero and Aristotle wanted you to be.
Well, there's this very important element that Jesus Christ is sinless and all good.
Yes.
He is infinite God.
Yeah.
And he calls a group of sinners and tells them at the Last Supper, just a couple of hours before one of the apostles betrays him with a kiss, the other 11 run away, and the leader, the Pope, Peter, denies even knowing him.
And he has foreknowledge of this.
And he knows it, and he told them that, and he still calls them friends.
Yes.
He doesn't wait for them to be perfect.
Yes.
He loves them as they are.
Yes.
That's key for the Christians modeling of friendship.
But he loves them too much to leave them there, right? He wants to bring them along. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, because what you see in the Fathers is this tremendous love that it just goes out to everyone. This openness to loving people who profoundly disagree with you, people who hate you, people who persecute you. Think of Cyprian of Carthage, right? The bishop of the city. The plague comes to town, and Cyprian tells his people, "You have to give medical care and food to people regardless of their religion." So he's telling them to treat the persecutors who have killed their families. That's amazing.
And in that, he's not only showing Christian charity, but he begins the first hospital.
Yes.
This is the institution of the hospital.
Yes.
Is a Christian idea.
Yes.
And it's one of love and charity for the people who want to kill you.
So the institutions come out of this idea of the openness to friendship. I think of others like Justin Martyr and the apologists, whoever wrote the anonymous letter to Diognetus, where they were approaching pagans and they were looking for that common ground. As earlier you were talking about the life of St. Francis Xavier, looking for that common ground, looking for things to praise in the culture of the other, and saying, this is what we can agree on. This is what we can love together.
Yeah.
And let's move forward from there. Let's have a conversation. Let's grow together. And again, then they get that affection, that mutual interest, and that trust. You need that trust.
We see the same thing in St. Paul when he is disputing at the Mars Hill,
Yes.
the Areopagus in Athens, that he cites the Greek philosophers as a way to say we share this in common.
Yes.
But then he also gives them more
Yes.
than what the Greek philosophers could possibly do.
So that's what I love about these ancient texts, is that we can see this happening. We can see the fathers befriending others and then bringing them along, bringing them down the road to the very brink of baptism. And this is evident in the texts that we have from that period.
Yeah, this is something that is a very important perspective of loving the people we evangelize to the point of being friends with them and trying to share certain ideals and where we possibly can.
Yes.
And in our culture, this has become, in the last couple of years especially, more difficult as people have created a cancel culture and have attacked churches and desecrated them. They're desecrating synagogues and churches especially. And, they're trying to make us react with the same anger, if not at times hatred, they have towards the faith and toward the church. And the fathers are giving us a different example.
Yes. My favorite text in this book is one that hardly anybody reads.
That's right.
It's the Octavius by Marcus Minucius Felix. Now,
Most folks don't even, you don't even hear because, Minucius Felix is not a saint.
no,
No.
and he's from the very early church, so he's often included in collections from that period because we don't have a lot of writings from that time. Now, Latinists, people who specialize in Latin literature, will praise that as one of the greatest works of Latin from that century.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it's beautifully written, but Christians don't usually go to it because he's an odd Christian. And it's an odd work. It's beautifully written. It reads like a novel. It's a
Yeah, it
memoir.
And you have pretty much most of the text
Yes.
in your book, so
Yes.
people can read this truly wonderful piece about some good friends who are just enjoying a day at the beach,
Yes.
but more of it than that happens.
Well, it's very interesting. See, Minucius Felix was actually a public person at that time. We know about him from other sources. He's quoted, he's cited, because he was a legal scholar. He was a judge. He was a North African working in Rome, okay? He had a lot of prestige. He had been a pagan, converted to Christianity. He's there, and he's vacationing with two other men. One is his colleague named Octavius, the man about whom the book is written. And Octavius also had been a pagan, converted to Christianity, had been a persecutor, and became a Christian. The third man is Cecil. And Cecil is a pagan. He doesn't get them at all. They're all lawyers, the three of them. And they're three lawyers on vacation, but they can't stop doing what lawyers do.
Arguing.
Right. So they kind of work this out. They have this awkward moment when they arrive at their resort. They're going to Ostia, right? And they arrive at the resort there, and they're watching, the kids skipping stones and at the beach and everything. And the pagan blows a kiss to one of the idols that was there at one of the temples. And Octavius says, I have to speak up. Friends don't let friends worship idols. And he starts lecturing him about that the idol is nothing. It's stone. You're not giving affection to stone. And Cecil is just hurt. And he goes silent. And you know this because Minucius Felix just starts describing the scenery and what the boys are doing, throwing their stones. And finally he speaks up and he says, hey, that hurt me. I want to have a dispute, and we'll argue it out here. I'll make the case for traditional Roman religion, you make the case for Christianity, and Marcus, who's a good judge and respected for that, he'll judge between our cases, and I trust he'll be just. And the rest of the book is just arguments about natural religion, mostly.
Yeah, what he saw as the advantages of paganism
Yes.
to help make the Roman Empire a great empire.
Yeah.
And then the criticism of the pagan religions, and that it wasn't the religion that made the empire.
Right.
It was Roman courage.
Roman courage and also Roman corruption.
Yeah, I was going to add ruthlessness. Yes.
Yeah, he brings that up.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
And there are a couple things that you can't help but notice is that they are good friends.
And they're frank.
Yeah, exactly, and they can be frank.
Yes.
They can state what they know, but they also are well informed. So the friendship does have this background. They know what they're talking about in history.
Yeah.
Most people need the footnotes you put in there to
Yeah.
recognize, oh, who was that?
Right.
And these are important events in Roman history that they just knew, and they could engage that discussion. They could talk about them as men that were passionate on both sides.
And you do get the impression it's the first conversation they had had about religion.
Yep.
They all knew each
Yes,
other. They had
yes.
been working together. They already had a bond of affection. They already had mutual interest. They already had trust. And they knew where each other stood, but they never really talked it out until this moment. So they're bringing up common misconceptions. There you get some urban legends in there about what Christians do behind closed doors, and all of these have to be addressed. And Octavius does a good job of answering them. He's a good apologist. What's interesting about it is he never quotes Scripture. In the entire book, Scripture is not quoted once.
Right.
Neither does anyone refer to Jesus Christ, which is very unusual for a document of that time. But of course, these things would have seemed to be nonsense to Cecil at that point in his development. So they're arguing natural theology with him. How can we say there's a good God if there's all this suffering in the world? How can we say there's an all-powerful God if there's all this? It's the same stuff you hear from new atheists today.
Yep.
So they have answers to those things. They're steeped enough in the philosophy of it that they can meet him where he is, address his real concerns with real answers, and then move him along. And they could look at the urban legends and say, come on, that's not true. If it's true at all, it's true of some of the pagans.
Well, again, there were accusations that the Christians were killing infants.
Yes.
And it was a misunderstanding of the Christian teaching that they're eating the body and blood of Christ.
Yes. Yes.
And the pagans thought that they were killing babies and eating them.
Yes.
And whereas in fact, it was pagans who, on a regular basis, exposed their children to be eaten by wild animals.
Both abortion and infanticide were very common,
Yep.
experienced in every family in Rome at that time. And so it was a matter of the slaughter of infants. And Octavius brings that up. And so it's a real debate. It's a real discussion. It's a frank and honest discussion.
It reminded me, as I was reading it, how some people argue, well, Jesus Christ never said anything about abortion in the Gospels, so it wasn't a problem for him, was it? Well, actually, it wasn't, because Jewish people didn't do abortion.
No, or infanticide.
Or infanticide.
They were really alone among the peoples of antiquity in that regard.
Yeah, only the Chinese and the Hindus didn't do abortion.
Interesting.
Yeah, they didn't, because the Hindus did not want to interfere with the transmigration of the soul when they were reincarnated. If you were to kill an infant, you could be interfering with their karma, and what's going to happen to them in this life. So you're not allowed to do that. And Chinese didn't, because they wanted people to kowtow which is do ancestor worship.
Yeah.
So those two societies forbade it for other reasons. The Israel forbade it because of the dignity of the child, his or herself. And Christians did. But when Christians came into the pagan world, then you see them write universally. Every single one of the people who ever mention abortion prohibits it.
And many do. That's the thing. We have a better paper trail on the condemnation of abortion than we have on many issues.
Yeah. And they bring that up in this and said, look, you pagans do this kind of thing. We don't.
Yes.
And that's very important. And I say that partly to say, Pace, Madam Speaker of the House, she tries to say that Augustine was okay with abortion. He wasn't. And that's just a flat out falsehood.
That's right.
I don't know if she's ignorant. I hope that's all that's wrong with her, not falsifying Augustine. But this is a great book and great conversation. If you want to find out more about Mike Aquilina's work, you can go to fathersofthechurch.com, fathersofthechurch.com, and also the Way of the Fathers podcast with Mike Aquilina. You can get that at catholicculture.org/podcast for those of you who like those podcasts. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a couple minutes and see if you have any of your comments or questions, and we'll take care of that too. All right, God bless. We'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, we are talking to Mike Aquilina about his brand new book called Friendship and the Fathers, How the Early Church Evangelized. And of course, this book is available at EWTNRC.com, where it is item number 1127. So we have that. Ready for some questions?
I am.
Let's start off with Peter. Peter, where are you calling from?
Good evening from New Jersey, and I wanted to ask the question that in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that in the latter times that the love of many will grow cold. And so I was wondering, might that be part of the problem of making friends? And also in other parts of the Bible, it tells us to actually turn away from certain people. I think in Matthew it also says to shake the dust off your feet and leave the home if you're not received there. So there's conflicting scriptures that maybe we can harmonize and answer that question. Thank you. God bless.
Thanks, Peter.
I think that with people who are cold or cool to our message, we have to make the decision that we're going to be in it for a while, be in it for the long haul. There's a quote I like from a saint from the 20th century, Saint Jose Maria. He said, "Out of 100 people, we are interested in 100." Okay, that was the attitude of the early Christians. The people they met, they wanted to bring to Jesus, and they felt a certain compulsion to bring them to Jesus. The problem is that out of 100 people, we're interested in 100, but not everybody is evidently interesting. Some people just don't seem very interesting to us. We have to give it time. We have to give the relationship time. One thing that works for me, that I learned from Padre Pio, is greeting the guardian angel of other people silently in my heart at the beginning of every conversation, to try to make sure that that conversation goes to good places and goes to the places that that person needs it to go.
Yeah.
So, you get that kind of help from heaven when you seek it. There is a lot of coldness right now, but think about it. These early Christians would go to these people who were cool to their message and risk persecution, risk denunciation. So many of the people we know died as martyrs were denounced by people close to them. They were denounced by Judases, friends of theirs, sometimes a spouse or a sibling. You know, we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready for that kind of thing, that kind of rejection that this might blow up in my face, but still take the risk and try to befriend others.
The other thing, too, in terms of when people are being cold, one of the things you can do, and I do this fairly often, is look for the things they are interested in.
Yeah.
There was, I'll never forget, one gentleman, didn't want to discuss the problems of his life. But one of the passions that he did have was watching the Cubs games.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not much of a sports fan. I just don't. There's just not much what I do. But that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He was passionate about the Cubs.
Yeah.
So I'd go sit and watch the Cubs games with him.
Yeah. And you could get interested in his interest.
And from that, he made a change, and he said, let's talk. So, and I didn't say much about the Cubs because I don't know much about baseball, but that was enough to get to open them. And that's sometimes what you have to do. In terms of the other issue of, wiping the dust off your feet, remember that's a different situation where they reject the gospel, and you get to a certain point where you may need to leave a certain situation behind to go off to where there's more fruit. St. Paul experienced this when he was in Asia Minor. Now today Turkey, before the Turks came though. When he was in Asia Minor, he said, the Lord closed a number of doors when I was in Troas, but then I sailed across to Neapolis and then went on to Corinth, and there he opened the doors. And it may be that at certain times you are not the one to try and evangelize that, and if you keep sometimes, and you have to use discernment here. There's no one principle.
That's right.
You have to discern here, so that maybe it'd be better if I go over here and evangelize and let this be. Sometimes you have to do that as well.
You can't force friendship. If someone's not interested in you, then you can't force it. I think it is interesting that in the Octavius we find those three men who have never before had a religious conversation, but they must have had many conversations before that.
Yes.
So they talked about these things, these matters of mutual interest. They talked about the Cubs.
Sure. Yeah. And, I certainly find that I make friends in a lot of different areas of life.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk about things that they're interested in.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you get to talk about more important things as well, like, are you going to heaven or hell?
Yes.
That's pretty important.
Yes. By then you've established the bond of trust, and
Yeah.
you can deliver that and know that it's not going to be the deal breaker in the friendship.
I think, too, another problem I'd like you to comment on, some people say, oh, well, I'm just being persecuted, and these people don't like me because I'm a good Catholic. I think we have to also be regularly examining our own lives to say, is it that they're persecuting me and I'm just going to be a martyr, or am I just a jerk?
And you can be that way by being belligerent about the faith, by bringing it up when they've signaled very clearly to you that they do not want you to bring it up. There are times when it's just better to say, how about those Steelers? It's better to go to the other conversation. You're not putting Jesus in a box somewhere. He's there with you no matter what, and he has an interest in the sports team that they're interested in, or whatever bond you have, and he'll be in that conversation in his way. But sometimes we just got to let up and wait for the moment to arrive the way Minucius Felix did in Octavius.
I, oftentimes say something I get in trouble for. I don't care. I'm old.
You're always getting in trouble.
I know. But I oftentimes do compare to my favorite sport, which is hunting. And when you're hunting, you don't jump out into the open and say, "Come on, you deer want a piece of me? Let's go." That's the last thing you do. You don't do that to the ducks or anything else.
Yeah.
You hide. You let. You go into camouflage. You cover your scent, you cover your sight, and you cover your sound. And by analogy, each of us has to let our own ego sort of fade into the background and be covered up and sit and listen. That's a big part of being a good hunter. You sit and you listen and watch to see what's coming in. And you learn from the animals. And you wait until you get a good heart shot.
There you go.
By analogy, you also need to sit and watch what people are doing and saying, and pay close attention to the things they bring up. I think that's very important.
Oh, sure. Friendship is impossible without that element of mutuality. We got to be listening and not just yammering.
And then you want that to be able to go to the heart of what is their real concern, not what I'm concerned about, what they are. And that would be, by analogy, the heart shot. This is, St. Paul was, as he said in 1 Corinthians 9, I'm all things to all people.
Yes.
He did that very well.
And so many of the fathers followed in the footsteps of Paul. They were prodigies of friendship. Augustine, I think, is the greatest of them. That he had so many friends from childhood who really remained his friends throughout life. Think about this. He went away to college from his small town. Well, they went too, because they wanted to be where Augustine was and continue the conversation. He got a job in Italy. They went to Italy because they wanted to be near Augustine. He moved to Milan. They moved to Milan. They got a cottage there so they could be near Augustine. And then when he went back to Africa, they went back too, and they followed him into holy orders. They lived with him. They shared life with him.
It became sort of the core basis of a religious order called the Augustinians.
That's right. And so he really models friendship in so many ways, and that's why he's a big part of this book, because he saw his life in terms of friendships. And he's someone who was very much influenced by Cicero's ideas about friendship early in life, but he changed over time. He came to see that Cicero's ideas, which were good natural observations, could be perfected by grace. So that Christians really had an advantage in this game of friendship. And the true friendship, the deepest friendship, was Christian friendship.
Yeah. No, this is a very important element. And it's also, one of the things you also bring out, friendship isn't always real easy.
Yes.
And so you talk about two great fathers of the church, St. Basil and St. Gregory of Nazianzen. They were best buds, but there was some tension there. Tell us about that.
Oh boy, and they were friends from very early in life too. They ended up being housemates when they were in college together in Athens. Okay, so it's kind of Ivy League at the time. They're studying with the best. One of their classmates was a future emperor, Julian.
That's right.
Right, so they were studying in this elite school, and they realized we both have this deep, abiding love for God, prayer, the study of literature. We love the classics. They lived together, and they shared a common life of prayer and study. And they said,
one of the greatest lines is when they say that we had a competition of trying to make the other one look better. We wanted the other one to excel and be praised.
And that's a beautiful way of expressing true, pure friendship.
Yeah.
So they had this going, and they kind of made the decision, we should go into the monastic life together. We'll start a monastery together. Basil had some property. It would have been easy to do. they had very different personalities, very different temperaments. You know, Basil was a man of action, right? Decisive. And he saw that the empire was in crisis at the time, and it was a religious crisis, and he wanted to be part of the solution. So he was very savvy in political ways.
And so folks understand how important the faith is in our friendship and in our attitude as friends. The issue was the emperor was an Arian heretic.
Yes.
He denied that Jesus is God the Son.
Right. And so Basil
And was making sure that the bishops were agreeing with him. He pressured bishops to get appointed who also were heretics.
So Basil's got the kind of personality that can fight this fight and is eager to fight it, wants it. Come on, bring it on. Gregory's the opposite. Gregory is the guy who's always saying, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, he likes to weigh things, ponder things for a long time. He's not decisive. Right. He tends to be easy to bully, okay, because he's so indecisive. And
it wasn't that he ever compromised the
no,
faith.
oh no, no, no.
But it was strategy as to how you address this. And he wasn't as aggressive as
So, there were a couple of points where these two personalities just collided, even though they were close friends. So close, they said, we were like two
one
bodies.
soul and
two bodies.
two bodies.
Right. That's how close they were. So they had this deep friendship. But Basil needed Gregory for the fight, he thought. And so he pressured him into accepting holy orders, and then pressured him into becoming a bishop of this backwater, Sasima, this town in the middle of nowhere with large mosquitoes, and so Gregory is there. And Gregory is the kind of guy who allows himself to be pushed into things, and then he resents it later.
Yep.
And he resented this for years. It comes up, in their relationship, and it really did create something of a rupture. It's a long story of a friendship.
Well, you tell it well. You
Yeah,
tell it well and
oh.
what the issues were and how ultimately they do become key in the victory of the Orthodox faith over the Arian heretics.
Each in his own way. And in the end, Gregory gives a funeral oration for Basil, telling the story of his whole life. And in the end saying, Basil was right about all of it.
Yep.
Even after he had poured out his heart about how deeply he had been hurt by Basil's actions, he recognized that the hand of providence was in this.
Yep. We have another caller. We have Kenneth. Kenneth, you there?
Yes,
Hi, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Bloomington, Illinois.
Oh, great. And what is your question or comment?
Well, I wanted to ask Mike Aquilina what the two of us should do who have a calling to go to the quads of the two universities that are here in Bloomington, Illinois, to talk to the students about continuing going to church and keeping in contact with their faith. We understand that students lose their interest in their faith when they go to a university.
Well, so what can he do to reach out to these students? We have a couple of minutes left.
I think that it works best when Catholic apostolates create opportunities for networks of students who are practicing the faith and training them in befriending other students. This is what Focus does, and does so well, that they really do cultivate the skill and the virtue of friendship in their Focus missionaries. That's one thing. But if you're the one who wants to go out and stand on the quad, I think the first thing you need to do is to find out what's important to those students who are right in front of you, to get into their lives that way, find out what their concerns are. because you know, they don't see the lack of church attendance as a concern. They don't see church attendance as a need. You've got to work a little bit to get into their lives to be able to explain to them why it's a need, why it should be a concern, why they should want this.
I think to also be alert to the way that sometimes the professors will be evangelizing against faith,
Yes.
against religion in general, against the Catholic faith and Catholic Church specifically. And they'll oftentimes have a lot of false notions. Find out if that's going on.
Yeah.
Find out if these students are being challenged about church, because they don't want to look like fools. They want to be, you know, for an education, so they want to be sophisticated and all that. Find out what they think about the church in the first place, and take that time so that you scratch where they itch.
Yes.
And not just start scratching and they don't care. That's not the problem that bothers them. That would be a very good thing. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's it. You know, and you can find out if it is being challenged in their studies. You know, where are they having difficulties? That's it. If you're in their lives at that level, if you're in that deeply, you can listen to them and find out where they're being challenged, where their faith is being challenged, and then you can make yourself educated enough to get answers to their questions.
Yep.
They want to know answers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And good data. That would be some of the things that they would like.
Yes.
And then you can talk also about the love of Christ.
Yes.
You got to get to that point.
Yeah.
The book is called Friendship and the Fathers, How the Early Church Evangelized by Mike Aquilina. And again, it's available at EWTNRC.com, where it is item number 1127. You can find out more at fathersofthechurch.com, or also go to Way of the Fathers podcast, which is available at catholicculture.org, catholicculture.org/podcast. Thank you very much for
Thanks for
being
having me
with
back.
us. Good to have you back, and thank you for writing this good book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And may the Lord bless all of you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And again, we can bring Mike here and do all the shows we do with him only because the network is brought to you by you. So please keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, and we'll pay our bills too. Thank you.